The wind did not merely blow in the neutral lands. It hunted. It stripped the warmth from the air with the precision of a butcher's knife, seeking out any exposed skin, any weakness, any gasp of breath that dared to defy the frozen silence. For Ayla, the wind was not an element of nature, but a constant, abusive companion. It was the only thing that touched her anymore. She pulled the threadbare wool of her cloak tighter around her shoulders. Though the fabric was so worn, it offered little more protection than a whisper. Her fingers, wrapped in strips of scavenged linen, were numb, the tips tinged with a dangerous, dull blue. She was digging for roots beneath the permafrost, her small, shivering form huddled against the base of a dead pine tree. This was her life. This was the penance for being born different. They called her a witch, a curse, a bad omen. Ayla paused, her hand hovering over the frozen earth. The insult still echoed in her memory, louder than the howling gale. She remembered the day her own pack, the Riverstone Wolves, had driven her out. She had been 12, a spindly thing with eyes the color of bruised violets, eyes that saw things that hadn't happened yet. They didn't want a seer who predicted famines and floods. They wanted strong warriors and fertile mates. They didn't want a girl who woke up screaming because she could feel the phantom pain of injuries that belonged to strangers. So they left her here, in the space between kingdoms, the graveyard of the world. She chipped away at the ice with a sharpened stone, unearthing a twisted, pale tuber. It was frozen solid, but it was food. As she reached for it, a sudden, blinding spike of agony drove itself like a railroad spike through her temples. Ayla gasped, dropping the stone. The world around her, the white snow, the gray sky dissolved. The vision didn't ask for permission. It simply seized her. Red, so much red, hot and metallic, steaming against the ice. A growl that shook the earth. A snap of metal crushing bone. Darkness, absolute, suffocating darkness. A king brought to his knees. Ayla fell back into the snow, her body seizing as the images flooded her mind. She felt the pain of a leg snapping. She felt the burning fire of poison coursing through veins that were not her own. She felt the terrifying, claustrophobic panic of sudden blindness. It wasn't just a vision. It was a sensory invasion. She choked on a scream, her hands clawing at her own eyes as if to gouge out the sight, but the images were burned on the inside of her skull. She saw a beast. A creature of shadow and night, massive and terrifying, caught in the jaws of an iron bear trap. He was dying. He was alone. And he was drowning in a darkness that he could not escape. The vision released her as abruptly as it had taken her, leaving her gasping on the frozen ground, sweat freezing instantly on her forehead. The silence of the neutral lands rushed back in, but the phantom pain in her leg throbbed in time with her heartbeat. She knew where he was. The pull was magnetic. A silver thread of fate tugged at her sternum, urging her forward. Ayla scrambled to her feet, swaying dizzily. Logic screamed at her to run the other way. It was a wolf, a shifter, the very kind of creature that had looked at her with disgust and thrown her into the wasteland to die. Why should she save one of them? If the spirits were kind, the cold would take him quickly. But Ayla had never been good at cruelty. Her curse was her empathy. She felt too much, saw too much. To leave him to die would be to carry the weight of his death in her soul forever. She secured her small bag of roots and turned against the wind, walking toward the scent of blood that only she could detect. The trek was brutal. The snow deepened, reaching past her knees, soaking the hem of her ragged dress. Her breath came in ragged clouds, her lungs burning with the effort. She walked for what felt like hours, guided only by the persistent throbbing in her mind and the metallic tang on the air that grew stronger with every step. She found him in a clearing, surrounded by jagged black rocks that looked like the teeth of the earth jutting upward. Ayla froze, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a gasp. The vision had not done him justice. He was massive, easily 3 times the size of the wolves from her old pack. His fur was not just black, it was the absence of light, a void that seemed to absorb the weak winter sun. He lay on his side, his chest heaving with shallow, ragged breaths that rattled deep in his throat. But the majesty of the beast was marred by the carnage. His back leg was clamped firmly in the rusted, serrated jaws of a massive bear trap, likely left by poachers months ago and forgotten under the snow. The snow around him was a gruesome slush of crimson. He had thrashed, fought, and gnawed, but the iron held fast. Isla took a hesitant step forward. The snow crunched beneath her worn boot. Instantly, the massive head snapped up. Isla stopped, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The wolf did not look at her. He looked through her. His ears were pinned back, his lips curled to reveal fangs the size of daggers, glistening with bloody foam. A low, thunderous growl rolled out of him, vibrating through the ground and up into the soles of her feet. It was a sound of pure, feral warning, but it was his eyes that held her captive. They should have been gold, or amber, or perhaps the steel gray of an alpha. Instead, they were a milky, clouded white. They darted frantically, unseeing, useless. "You're blind," Ayla whispered, the realization stealing the breath from her lungs. The wolf snarled at the sound of her voice, snapping his jaws at the air. He tried to lunge in her direction, but the trap held him anchored, and the movement clearly caused him agonizing pain. He collapsed back onto the snow with a whine that sounded too human, too broken. Isla stood on the edge of the clearing, trembling. This was an alpha. The sheer power radiating off him, even in this broken state, was suffocating. If she got close enough to help, he could snap her neck with a single bite. He wouldn't even know he was doing it. He was terrified, hurt, and acting on instinct. She should leave. She should turn around, go back to her shack, boil her roots, and survive another day. But then she saw it, the black veins pulsing around his eyes, spreading like a spiderweb beneath his fur. Nightshade. It wasn't just a physical injury. He had been poisoned. The blindness wasn't from the trauma. It was magical, chemical, manufactured. Someone had done this to him. Someone had stripped this magnificent creature of his sight and left him here to be eaten by the cold. Ayla felt a surge of indignation hot enough to melt the ice around her heart. She knew what it was like to be discarded. She knew the hollow ache of being thrown away because you were deemed broken. "I'm not going to hurt you," she said, projecting her voice as clearly as she could over the wind. She kept her tone low, soothing, the way one would speak to a frightened child. The wolf's ears swiveled toward her. He stopped growling, though his posture remained rigid, ready to strike. He sniffed the air, his large black nose twitching. Isla realized what he must be smelling. Not a warrior, not a threat, just lavender, dried herbs, and the distinct, ozone scent of a storm that followed all seers. And fear. He would smell her fear. She took another step. "I know you can't see me," she continued, her voice trembling slightly. "But I can see you. You're trapped. You're bleeding." The wolf let out a sharp huff of air, turning his head away, as if ashamed. The pride of an alpha was a fragile thing, and to be seen like this helpless, crippled, must have been worse than the pain of the trap. Isla moved closer, slowly, announcing her presence with the crunch of snow. "I can open the trap," she said softly. "But you have to let me close. You have to trust me. Trust. A dangerous currency in the neutral lands." She was 10 feet away now. 5 feet. The wolf tensed, his muscles coiling beneath the thick black fur. He could kill her now. One lunge. He didn't need eyes to find her throat at this distance. Isla stopped just outside the reach of his jaws. She sank to her knees in the snow, lowering her height to appear less threatening, though she knew he couldn't see the gesture. She pulled off her gloves, exposing her pale, freezing hands to the air. She needed the dexterity. "I'm Isla," she whispered. "I'm an outcast, just like you are right now." She reached into her satchel and pulled out a small bundle of dried sage. She crushed it between her fingers, releasing the pungent, earthy aroma. She held her hand out. The wolf hesitated. He was shivering violently now, the adrenaline fading to leave only the cold and the poison. He stretched his neck out, sniffing the sage. Then, he sniffed her hand. His breath was hot and wet against her skin. He didn't bite. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, the massive wolf lowered his head to the snow. It was a surrender. He had no fight left. Isla didn't waste a second. She crawled forward, the ice biting into her knees through her thin skirt. She moved toward his flank, toward the gruesome mess of the trap. Up close, the smell of infection was overpowering. The nightshade was working fast. If she didn't get him warm, if she didn't slow the poison, he would be dead by moonrise. She placed her hands on the cold iron of the trap. It was heavy, designed to hold bears, not wolves. She would need leverage. She would need strength she wasn't sure she possessed. "This is going to hurt," she murmured, looking at the wolf's milky eyes. He was staring blankly at the sky, panting. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Ayla gripped the release lever. Her muscles screamed in protest as she pushed down with everything she had. She gritted her teeth, a guttural cry of effort tearing from her throat. The metal groaned, rusted and stubborn. The wolf yelped a high, piercing sound as the jaws shifted, grinding against his shattered bone. I know, Isla cried, tears freezing on her cheeks. "Almost there." She threw her entire body weight onto the lever. With a sickening screech of metal, the jaws sprang open. The wolf scrambled backward, dragging his mangled leg, whining in confusion and relief. He collapsed a few feet away, panting heavily. Ayla sat back on her heels, gasping for air, her hands shaking uncontrollably. She had done it. He was free, but as she looked at him, she realized the victory was hollow. He couldn't stand. The poison was shutting down his nervous system. The black veins around his eyes were spreading, darkening the fur on his face. He wasn't healing. Shifters healed fast, but the nightshade halted all regeneration. He was free of the iron, but he was still a prisoner of the poison. The wolf let out a soft, mournful howl, weak and broken, and laid his head on his paws. He was waiting to die. Isla looked at the darkening sky. The temperature was dropping. A blizzard was coming. If she left him here, the snow would bury him within the hour. She looked back at the beast. He was a monster, a killer, a creature of violence. But in the set of his jaw, in the way he curled into himself, she saw only a kindred spirit, broken, betrayed, blind to the world. She couldn't carry him. He was immense. But her shack wasn't far, perhaps half a mile. If she could get him to move, if she could guide him. "I won't let you die alone," she whispered into the wind, a vow that felt heavy with destiny. She stood up, her knees cracking. She walked over to the massive head of the wolf and did something insanely dangerous. She placed her small, cold hands on either side of his face. The wolf froze, but he didn't pull away. He leaned into her touch, desperate for the contact, for the grounding reality of another living soul. "Can you stand?" she asked him, her voice fierce. "You have to stand. I have a fire, I have shelter, but you have to walk." The wolf seemed to understand, or perhaps he simply had no other choice. With a groan of effort that rumbled deep in his chest, the Alpha King pushed himself up on 3 legs. He swayed, his equilibrium destroyed by the blindness, but he stood. Isla grabbed a handful of his thick mane at the back of his neck, burying her fingers in the coarse fur. "I will be your eyes," she promised him. "Follow my voice, follow my scent. We are going home." She tugged him forward, and blindly, trustingly, the beast followed the witch into the gathering storm. The door to the shack rattled violently against its frame, a wooden protest against the blizzard raging outside. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of dried rosemary, wood smoke, and the heavy, metallic tang of blood. Isla collapsed against the rough timber of the door, latching it shut with trembling fingers. The silence that followed was relative. The wind still screamed, but it was muffled now, a beast scratching to get in. But the beast was already inside. The massive black wolf took up nearly half the floor space of her tiny sanctuary. He had collapsed the moment they crossed the threshold, his strength finally failing him. He lay on the woven rug near the hearth, his breathing wet and labored. The heat of the fire, banked low in the stone grate, seemed to do little to warm him. If anything, he was shivering more violently now, his great body convulsing with tremors that shook the floorboards beneath Ayla's feet. Ayla pushed herself up, ignoring the burning ache in her own frozen limbs. She rushed to the hearth, feeding the fire with precious logs she had spent weeks gathering. The flames roared to life, casting, dancing, frantic shadows against the walls, shadows that looked too much like the dark veins spreading across the wolf's face. "Stay with me," she whispered, grabbing a basin of water and a clean rag. "You are safe here. You are safe." She knelt beside him. Up close, the damage was horrifying. The trap had mangled his rear leg, tearing muscle and exposing bone, but that wasn't what was killing him. It was the poison. The milky whiteness of his eyes was beginning to bleed into a bruised purple, and the black web of veins had stretched down his muzzle, reaching for his throat. Suddenly, the wolf arched his back, a guttural sound tearing from his chest that was half growl, half human scream. The sound of bones cracking echoed in the small room, a wet, popping sound that made Ayla's stomach turn. He was shifting. The trauma and the fever were forcing his body to revert. It was a defense mechanism, a desperate attempt by his biology to protect the vital organs by shedding the high-energy wolf form. But without energy, the shift was slow and agonizing. Ayla scrambled back, pressing herself against the wall as the massive beast began to contort. Fur receded into skin. The long snout shortened, the jaw realigning with a sickening crunch. Claws retracted into human fingers. It was a grotesque, beautiful, terrifying metamorphosis. In a matter of moments, the giant predator was gone. In his place lay a man. He was naked, shivering, and covered in a sheen of cold sweat mixed with blood. Even curled in a fetal position, he was imposing. His shoulders were broad, sculpted with the kind of muscle built for war, not labor. His skin was tanned but pallid now, turning a sickly gray under the influence of the nightshade. A jagged scar ran from his collarbone to his hip, a map of past violence. Ayla crawled back toward him, her fear replaced by a surgeon's focus. She reached out, her hand hovering over his forehead. He was burning up. His skin felt like a furnace, radiating a heat that was unnatural. "Water," he croaked. The voice was deep, a rumble of gravel and pain, but it was delirious. He thrashed his head side to side, his blind eyes wide and staring at nothing. "The shadows. They're eating the light." "It's just the fever," Ayla soothed, though she knew she was lying. She lifted his head gently, pressing a tin cup of water to his cracked lips. He drank greedily, choking, spilling half of it down his chest. When he finished, he grabbed her wrist. His grip was bruising, desperate. "Who are you?" he rasped, his unseeing eyes trying to find purchase on her face. "Why do you smell like rain?" "I'm no one," Ayla said softly, peeling his fingers from her wrist. "Rest now." She moved to her work table, her sanctuary of herbs and jars. She worked with frantic efficiency. She ground willow bark for the pain, mixed it with a paste of crushed garlic and honey for the infection. She applied the poultice to his mangled leg, binding it tight with strips of clean linen. He groaned when she tightened the bandage, but he didn't pull away. But when she turned her attention to the poison, her heart sank. She took a droplet of the black oozing liquid from the corner of his eye and smeared it onto a piece of parchment. It hissed, burning a hole straight through the paper. Magical nightshade, refined, potent, irreversible. Ayla stared at the smoking paper, her breath hitched in her throat. Conventional medicine couldn't touch this. This wasn't a sickness, it was a curse. It was designed not just to blind, but to hollow out the victim, to sever their connection to their wolf, and eventually, to stop their heart. He didn't have days. He had hours, maybe less. She looked back at the stranger on her floor. He was mumbling again, names of people she didn't know, orders to a pack that wasn't there. He was a king. She had seen it in her vision. A leader of thousands. A warrior who protected the weak. And he was dying in the shack of a rejected seer, on a dirty rug, defeated by treachery. Isla turned to her small shelf of books. There were only 3 tattered, water-damaged things she had stolen from the Riverstone pack before she was exiled. She pulled down the heavy, leather-bound grimoire. It was an old-world text, filled with the kind of magic that modern wolves forbade. She flipped through the brittle pages, her eyes scanning the ancient runes. Healing, antidotes, purification. Nothing. Every cure required ingredients that grew only in summer, or rare crystals she would never possess. Then, the book fell open to a page near the back. The binding was cracked here, as if the book itself tried to hide this chapter. The rite of transfer. Isla's finger traced the faded ink. It wasn't a cure. It was an exchange. That which is broken cannot be erased, only moved. To save the sight of the king, the servant must offer the eyes. To save the life, the savior must offer the soul. Darkness for light, blood for blood, extra ready. Ayla read the words twice. Then a third time. The room seemed to grow colder. She looked at the man. He had stopped thrashing. His breathing was becoming shallow, the pauses between exhales growing terrifyingly long. The black veins had reached his neck. The poison was closing in on his heart. If she did nothing, he would die. The world would lose an alpha king, and chaos would descend on the packs. If she did this... Isla touched her own face. She traced the curve of her cheekbone, the flutter of her eyelashes. She walked to the small, cracked mirror hanging by the door. She looked at herself. Her eyes were violet, bright, unusual, shocking. They were the only thing about her that was special. They were her curse, yes, but they were also her window to the world. She loved the way the sunlight hit the snow. She loved the deep green of the pine needles. She loved the sight of the moon rising over the ridge. If she did this, she would never see the moon again. She would never see the face of a lover, or the color of a flower. She would be plunged into the same terrifying, suffocating darkness that was currently killing him. Why? She whispered to her reflection. Why should I give everything for a stranger who would likely despise me? Because that was who she was. Because the Riverstone pack had thrown her away for being different, but she had refused to let it make her cruel. Because she had seen his death in her vision, and she knew, with a certainty that vibrated in her bones, that this man was meant to live. He was the balance. He was the future. She was just the outcast. Ayla turned away from the mirror. She didn't look back. She walked to the hearth and threw a handful of dried sage into the fire. The smoke billowed up, thick and cleansing. She knelt beside the dying king. He was cold now. The fever had burned itself out, leaving behind the chill of the grave. I am going to save you, Isla whispered, her voice shaking uncontrollably. But you have to live. You have to make it worth it. She positioned herself behind his head, cradling his skull in her lap. His hair was damp and coarse, smelling of pine and sickness. She took a deep breath, centering herself, pulling on the small, thrumming well of magic that lived in her blood. She placed her thumbs gently over his closed eyelids. Ex tenebris, she began, the ancient tongue clumsy in her mouth. Under her hands, the man gasped. His eyes flew open beneath her thumbs, his lashes fluttering against her skin. Ad lucem. The magic took hold instantly. It wasn't gentle. It was a violent, magnetic pull. Isla felt a jolt of electricity shoot up her arms, slamming into her chest. She gasped, her back arching. It felt as if hooks were being sunk into her optic nerves. She could feel the poison in him, viscous, hateful, living sludge. It didn't want to leave him. It wanted to consume. Isla had to invite it in. Take it, she sobbed, tears leaking from her eyes. Take me instead. She visualized the darkness inside him. She visualized pulling it out, like drawing venom from a wound. She offered her own clear, violet sight as the vessel. The transfer began. It started as a gray fog creeping into the edges of her vision. Then, pain. White-hot, searing pain that felt like someone was pouring molten lead into her sockets. Ayla screamed. She couldn't help it. The sound ripped through the small shack, raw and agonizing. The man beneath her thrashed, his body convulsing as the sickness was ripped from his veins. He groaned, a deep, resonant sound of relief, as if a boulder was being lifted from his chest. But for Isla, the weight was crushing. The gray fog turned to charcoal, then to absolute, impenetrable black. She felt the pigment draining from her irises. She felt the light dying. I can't see the fire, she thought, panic spiking in her chest. I can't see the ceiling. She tried to blink, but the darkness didn't shift. It was heavy. It was permanent. Please, she whimpered, the incantation forgotten in the face of the horror. Please, just a little light, just a little, but the magic demanded its price. With one final, sickening lurch, the last of the poison left the king's body. It rushed into Ayla, flooding her senses. She felt the dizziness, the nausea, the disorientation. Her hand slipped from his face. She fell sideways, curling into a ball on the wooden floor. The silence that returned to the room was heavy, broken only by the crackle of the fire she could no longer see. Ayla lay panting, her hands pressed over her eyes. They burned. They felt like they were on fire. She blinked rapidly, desperate for a flash of color, a shadow, anything, nothing, just the void. No, she whispered, her voice breaking. No, no, no. She reached out blindly, her hand sweeping across the floorboards, until she felt the rough texture of the rug. She crawled forward until she touched the man's arm. His skin was warm, not fever-hot, but the healthy, steady warmth of a living being. His breathing had deepened, slowed into the rhythmic cadence of deep, restorative sleep. His heart beat strong and steady against his ribs, thump, 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 thump. He was healed. The transfer was complete. Isla pulled her knees to her chest, burying her face in her skirt. The tears that soaked the fabric were hot, but they brought no relief. She had saved him. She had done the noble thing, the righteous thing. But as the reality of her eternal night settled in, the nobility crumbled into grief. She was alone in the dark. She listened to the wind outside, unable to see the door that held it back. She listened to the stranger's breathing, unable to see the face she had sacrificed everything for. And in the darkness of the shack, the blind girl wept, mourning the death of her world, so that his could begin again. Morning arrived not with a whisper, but with a shout of brilliance. Lucian Blackwood, the Alpha King of the Obsidian Shadow Pack, woke with a gasp, his body jerking upright on the hard wooden floor. His hand flew to his throat, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. His instincts were screaming danger, trap, poison, darkness. He braced himself for the crushing weight of the blindness, for the agonizing burn of the nightshade in his veins. He squeezed his eyes shut, terrified to open them, and find only the void, but even through his closed lids, he felt it. Red. The warmth of the sun hitting his face, the blood pulsing in his eyelids. Slowly, terrifyingly, Lucian opened his eyes. The world flooded in. It was an assault of clarity. He saw the intricate, dust-moted beams of sunlight streaming through the cracks in the wooden walls. He saw the rough, splintered grain of the floorboards beneath his naked feet. He saw the soot stains on the stone hearth, the dried herbs hanging from the rafters, green, brown, yellow, each color vibrating with an intensity that made his head spin. He could see. Lucian blinked rapidly, tears of sheer physiological shock prickling at the corners of his eyes. His vision wasn't just restored, it was honed. The nightshade had been meant to destroy his sight, but whatever magic had purged, it seemed to have stripped away the film of mortality as well. He could see the dust settling on a jar across the room. He could see the individual fibers of the woven rug. He took a deep breath. The air tasted of pine, ash, and lavender. The memory hit him like a physical blow. The trap, the pain, the woman. I will be your eyes. Lucian scrambled to his feet. His body, which had been broken and failing hours ago, was now humming with raw, aggressive power. His leg, where the trap had crushed the bone, felt stiff but whole. The regeneration was complete. The wolf inside him was prowling, restless, demanding to see the source of the scent. He spun around, scanning the small, destitute shack, and then he saw her. She was curled up in the corner of the room, wedged between a rickety bookshelf and the wall, as if trying to make herself as small as possible. She was asleep, her head resting on her knees. Her dress was little more than rags, gray and thin, offering no protection against the chill of the morning. Her hair, a tangled curtain of dark waves, hid her face. Lucian took a step toward her. The floorboard groaned under his weight. The girl flinched in her sleep, a small, whimpering sound escaping her lips. Lucian froze. He was a predator. He knew how to stalk. He lowered his center of gravity, moving with the silent, lethal grace of an apex hunter. He needed to see her face. He needed to know what had pulled him from the grave. He reached her. He towered over her sleeping form, his shadow falling across her. "Wake up," he commanded. His voice was deep, a rumble that vibrated the air in the small room. It wasn't the voice of the dying beast from last night. It was the voice of a king. The girl gasped, jerking awake. Her head snapped up. Lucian's breath caught in his throat. She was beautiful, in a haunted, fragile way. Her skin was pale as moonlight, her features delicate. But it was her eyes that stopped his heart. They were wide, staring straight at him. But they were not looking at him. Yesterday, in his delirium, he had sensed their color violet, vibrant, alive. Now, they were a flat, clouded gray. The pupils were blown wide, unreacting to the harsh sunlight streaming onto her face. They were twin pools of fog. She blinked, but her gaze didn't shift. She turned her head slightly to the left, towards the sound of his breathing, missing his face by inches. "Who is there?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Her hands came up, groping blindly at the air between them. Is it you?" Lucian felt a cold dread coil in his stomach. He looked at her eyes, really looked at them with his heightened hunter's sight. He saw the faint, residual traces of black magic lingering in her irises. He saw the damage. He looked down at his own hands, perfect, strong. He touched his face. His vision was razor-sharp. He remembered the chanting, ex tenebris, ad lucem, out of darkness, into light. The transfer. He staggered back a step, the realization hitting him with the force of a falling tree. She hadn't cured him. She hadn't found an antidote. She had taken it. "You," Lucian breathed, the words strangling him. "What did you do?" Isla scrambled backward, pushing herself against the wall. She looked terrified of him. I saved you. The poison. It was killing you. You took my blindness," Lucian accused, his voice rising. He wasn't angry at her. He was horrified. He was furious at the universe, at the cost. "You took the nightshade into yourself." "There was no other way," she said, her voice small but defiant. She wrapped her arms around herself, shivering. "You are an alpha, a king. You have a pack to lead. I am just Isla, just Isla." The words hung in the air, heavy and wrong. Lucian looked at this small, broken creature. She was starving. She was freezing. She was an outcast living in the wasteland. And she had voluntarily walked into eternal darkness to save a monster she didn't know. And then, it happened. The wolf inside Lucian, usually a creature of dominance and violence, suddenly lunged against his ribcage. It didn't want to fight her. It wanted to own her. It wanted to wrap around her and tear the throat out of anything that dared to look at her wrong. A scent exploded in the room, overpowering the dust and the herbs. It was the smell of the storm. Ozone, rain, lavender, and something sweeter, deeper. "Mate." The word roared through Lucian's mind, drowning out all logic. The shock of it nearly brought him to his knees. He had spent centuries believing he had no mate, that the moon goddess had deemed him too violent, too cursed to be paired. And here she was, a rogue, a witch, a blind girl in a shack. She had felt the pull too, he knew she had. That was why she had come for him in the snow. That was why she had sacrificed herself. The bond had guided her, even if she didn't understand it yet. Lucian moved. He didn't think. He just reacted. He dropped to his knees in front of her. The movement was sudden, heavy. Ayla gasped, shrinking away. "Please," she stammered, her eyes darting frantically, seeing nothing. "I won't ask for anything. You can go. You can leave me here." "Leave you?" Lucian growled. The idea was so offensive it made his teeth ache. "You think I would leave you?" He reached out and took her hands. Her skin was ice cold. His was burning hot. When their skin touched, a spark visible, blue, and crackling jumped between them. Ayla cried out, trying to pull away, but Lucian held fast. He pulled her hands to his chest, placing them directly over his heart. He needed her to feel it. He needed her to feel the way it hammered against his ribs, beating a rhythm that belonged only to her. "Do you feel that?" he demanded, his voice rough with emotion. "Do you know what that is?" Ayla's blind eyes widened. Her fingers curled against his bare chest, feeling the hard muscle and the frantic drumbeat of his heart. A flush rose on her pale cheeks. It's fast," she whispered. "It's yours," Lucian corrected. "It beats for you, only for you." He leaned in, inhaling the scent of her hair. He was intoxicated. The realization of what she had done was settling into his bones, transforming his gratitude into a fanatic, religious devotion. "You gave me your eyes, Ayla," he said, his voice dropping to a husky murmur. "You gave me the sun. You gave me the world. I wanted you to live," she said, a tear slipping from her clouded eye. "You looked so sad in the dark." The innocence of it shattered him. Lucian released one of her hands and reached up to cup her face. His thumb brushed away the tear. He looked into those gray, sightless depths and swore a silent oath to the moon goddess. She will never suffer again. She will never be cold. She will never be hungry. And anyone who mocks her darkness will die by my hand. "I am Lucian Blackwood," he told her, the introduction formal, a decree. "I am the Alpha of the Obsidian Shadow Pack. I am the King of the Northern Territories." Ayla trembled under his touch. "I know. I saw it, in my vision." "Then hear this vision," Lucian said intensely. "You are not an outcast anymore. You are not a rogue. You are mine." He waited for her to recoil, to argue, but Ayla simply slumped slightly, as if the strings holding her up had been cut. She was exhausted, drained by the magic and the trauma. "But I can't see you," she whispered, her voice breaking with grief. "I don't know what you look like anymore. I forgot to look before I did the spell." The tragedy of it pierced Lucian's heart. She hadn't even taken a moment to memorize his face before plunging herself into the void. "Then I will tell you," Lucian said softly. He took her hand and guided it to his face. He pressed her palm against his jaw, covered in rough stubble. "I have black hair," he murmured, moving her hand up to feel the texture. "Like a raven's wing. My eyes are gold, bright gold, thanks to you. I have a scar." He guided her fingers down his cheek to the jagged line on his jaw. "Here. From a challenge I won when I was a boy." Ayla's fingers traced the features tentatively. She was reading him like Braille. Her touch was featherlight, reverent. "You feel strong," she said quietly. "I am," Lucian promised. "Strong enough to carry you, strong enough to kill for you." He felt the shift in the air. The reality of their situation was crashing in. They were still in the neutral lands. Thorn, the traitor, was likely still hunting for his body. The blizzard had passed, but the danger remained. Lucian stood up, pulling Ayla up with him. She stumbled, disoriented by the sudden movement and her lack of sight. She grasped at his arms, panicking. "I've got you," he said instantly, his arm wrapping around her waist like an iron band. "I will never let you fall. Do you understand? Never." He looked around the shack. It was a hovel, a place of misery. It was unworthy of the woman who carried the soul of a king. "We are leaving," he announced. "Leaving?" Ayla asked, anxiety spiking in her voice. "But where? I can't travel. I can't see the path." "You don't need to see the path," Lucian said. He bent down and effortlessly swept her up into his arms, cradling her against his chest, as if she weighed nothing more than a snowflake. Ayla gasped, her arms instinctively going around his neck. "Lucian, put me down. I'm heavy. I'm dirty." "You are light as a feather," he countered, walking towards the door. "And you are the savior of the Obsidian King. You will never walk in the snow again, unless you choose to." He kicked the door open. The outside world was blindingly white. The storm had left a blanket of pristine snow covering the wasteland. The sun was high and bright. Lucian stepped out into the cold, the wind whipping at his bare skin, but he didn't feel it. The heat of the bond, the fire of his reclaimed power, kept him warm. Ayla buried her face in his neck, hiding from the brightness she couldn't see but could feel on her skin. "Where are we going?" she muffled against his shoulder. Lucian looked toward the north, toward the jagged peaks of the Obsidian Mountains. His eyes narrowed. He could see for miles. He could see the path home. And he could see the vengeance that awaited him. "Home," Lucian said, his voice a dark promise. "We are going to my kingdom, and I am going to show them exactly what happens to those who try to break what is mine." He tightened his grip on her. "Close your eyes, little seer," he whispered into her ear. "Rest. I have the watch now." And with long, powerful strides, the Alpha King carried his blind queen out of the wasteland, leaving the darkness behind them, bound for a destiny that would shake the world. The journey back to the Obsidian Kingdom was a blur of sensory chaos for Ayla. Without her sight, the world had become a terrifying cacophony of wind, crunching snow, and the heavy, rhythmic thud of Lucian's boots. He had refused to put her down. For miles, the Alpha King carried her through the frozen passes, his arms locking her against his chest like a precious relic recovered from the ruins. When the air changed, Ayla felt it first. The biting wind of the wasteland died down, replaced by the stillness of stone walls and the scent of torches burning pine and resin. "We are here," Lucian murmured, his voice rumbling against her ear. Ayla stiffened. She heard the heavy creak of massive iron gates opening, the sound echoing like a thunderclap. Then came the gasps. Dozens, perhaps hundreds of them. The scent of wolves, many wolves, flooded her nose. She smelled fear, shock, and the sharp, metallic tang of weapons being drawn. "My lord!" a voice cried out, trembling. You live!" "I live," Lucian announced, his voice projecting across the courtyard with terrifying authority. "And I have returned with the one who saved me." Ayla buried her face in his neck, wishing she could disappear. She knew what they saw, their magnificent, returned king carrying a ragged, dirty exile. She felt the weight of their judgment pressing against her skin. Lucian ignored them all. He strode through the palace, barking orders that sent servants scrambling. "Clear the master suite. Prepare a bath. Hot water. Oils. Bring the healer, not for me, for her feet. And bring food, meat, fruit, everything." He carried her up winding stone stairs, the sounds of the pack fading behind heavy oak doors. Finally, he stopped. Ayla heard the sound of water rushing into a basin. Steam, thick and scented with jasmine and sandalwood, curled around her. Lucian set her down gently, but he kept his hands on her shoulders, steadying her. "You are safe, Ayla. This is my private sanctuary. No one enters here without my permission." "It smells expensive," she whispered, feeling incredibly small. "It is yours," Lucian said simply. He stepped away, and Ayla heard the rustle of fabric. "The maids will help you," she began, clutching her rags. "No maids," Lucian interrupted, his tone brooking no argument. "They do not touch you. Not yet. You are bruised, you are frightened, and you cannot see who is reaching for you. I will do it." Ayla's breath hitched. "Lucian, you are a king. You cannot bathe a rogue. I am a man who owes you his life," he corrected softly. "Let me serve you." He didn't wait for permission. His large, calloused hands were surprisingly gentle as he peeled away the tattered remains of her dress. Ayla shivered, standing naked in the center of the room, darkness surrounding her. She felt exposed, Not just physically, but spiritually. He could see every scar, every rib jutting out from hunger, every flaw. But Lucian made no sound of judgment. He lifted her into the massive tub. The hot water enveloped her like a liquid embrace, stinging her frozen skin before soothing it. Ayla let out a long, shuddering sigh, her head tipping back against the marble rim. For the next hour, the Alpha King became a servant. He washed her hair, massaging the scalp until the tension headache that had plagued her for days began to fade. He used a soft sponge to clean the grime from her arms, narrating his movements so she wouldn't flinch. "I am washing your left arm now," he would say. "I am rinsing your hair. Close your eyes. Or, keep them closed." He faltered, the guilt heavy in his voice. "It's all right," Ayla said, reaching out blindly to find his hand in the water. She squeezed his fingers. "The darkness. It is not so bad when you are here. Your voice. It anchors me." Lucian gripped her hand tight, bringing it to his lips. "Then I will never stop talking to you." When the bath was done, he dried her with towels that felt like clouds. He dressed her not in rags, but in silk. He described it as he slipped it over her head. "It is midnight blue, the color of the obsidian pack. It flows like water. It has silver threading at the cuffs." Ayla ran her hands down the fabric. It was soft, cool, and luxurious. It made her feel like an imposter. "I am a beggar dressed as a queen," she murmured. "You are a queen," Lucian growled low in his throat. He stood behind her, his hands resting on her waist, his chin resting on top of her head. "And tonight, the pack will see you as I do." "Tonight?" Ayla panicked. "The gathering is called," Lucian said, his demeanor hardening. "Thorn believes I am dead. He plans to claim the throne at moonrise. We are going to correct him." The great hall of the Obsidian Palace was a cavernous space, echoing with the murmurs of 300 wolves. The air was thick with tension, smelling of unwashed bodies, anxiety, and the sour scent of betrayal. Ayla stood at the top of the grand staircase, her hand gripping Lucian's arm so hard her knuckles turned white. She couldn't see the crowd, but she could feel them. The sheer volume of attention was a physical weight. "Do not let go," she whispered. "I have you," Lucian replied, his voice a pillar of stone. "Walk with me. Match my step." They descended. The hall went silent. The sound of Lucian's boots on the stone steps was the only thing audible. Ayla counted the steps in her head, relying entirely on the flex of Lucian's muscle under her hand to guide her. When they reached the floor, a voice cut through the silence. It was smooth, oily, and laced with mock relief. "Alpha Lucian." Ayla felt Lucian stiffen. "Beta Thorn," Lucian greeted, his voice deceptively calm. "We thought you were lost to the winter," Thorn said, stepping closer. Ayla could hear the smirk in his voice. "We were just discussing the succession. The pack cannot be without a leader." "The pack has a leader," Lucian said. "And I have brought a guest. Ayla, of the neutral lands. She is the one who saved me." A ripple of confusion went through the room. "A female?" Thorn laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "You were saved by a rogue female? Look at her, Lucian. She is frail. She looks like a gust of wind would shatter her." Ayla shrank back, the old shame flaring in her chest. "She is stronger than any warrior in this room," Lucian said, his voice dropping an octave. "She healed me when I was left for dead." Thorn moved closer. Ayla could smell him now, musk and arrogance. "Healed you? With what? Witchcraft?" He sniffed the air near Ayla. "She smells of ozone. She is a defect, a witch." "She is my savior," Lucian warned, a growl threading through his words. "She is blind," Thorn shouted suddenly, pointing a finger. The accusation rang out. "Look at her eyes. They are dead. You bring a blind, broken cripple into our hall and expect us to honor her? She is a burden, Lucian. She will produce weak pups. She cannot hunt. She cannot fight. She is useless." The insults hit Ayla like stones. She wanted to run, but the darkness held her trapped. "She is not useless," Lucian said, his body vibrating with suppressed rage. Is she? Thorn challenged. Let us see. Isla heard the whistle of air before she registered the danger. Thorn had drawn a dagger. He didn't aim to kill her, he aimed to humiliate her. He threw the blade, aiming for the stone floor right beside her foot. It was a test. A sighted wolf would flinch. A blind wolf would stand dumbly, unaware of the steel flying toward them until it sparked against the ground. But Thorn had made a fatal miscalculation. He assumed Lucian was still weak. He assumed Lucian's sight was still compromised. The blade never hit the floor. There was a sharp clack of metal against palm. The room gasped as one entity. Lucian had caught the dagger mid-air, inches from Isla's face. He hadn't even looked at it. He had snatched it from the air with supernatural reflexes. Silence stretched, agonizing and absolute. Lucian slowly turned his head to look at Thorn. For the first time, he let his eyes flare not the milky white of the blind, but the burning, molten gold of an enraged alpha. You threw a weapon, Lucian said, his voice eerily quiet. At my mate. The word mate hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Thorn's heart rate spiked. Isla could hear it, a frantic rabbit drumming. Lucian, your eyes, you can see? I see everything, Lucian hissed. He crushed the dagger in his hand, the metal groaning as he bent it like wet clay. I see the poison you bought from the southern witches. I see the ambition rotting your soul. And I see that you have just forfeited your life. Thorn snarled, realizing there was no way out. Kill him! He is bewitched! He screamed to his guards. 3 wolves loyal to Thorn lunged. Isla screamed, Lucian! But the king did not need eyes to kill. He had hers now, and they were sharp. He moved with a blur of violence. He didn't shift, he didn't need to. He backhanded the first guard with enough force to shatter a jaw. He kicked the second into a stone pillar with a sickening crunch. Thorn tried to run. Lucian was faster. He crossed the distance in a single leap, tackling the traitor to the ground. It wasn't a fight. It was an execution. Lucian dragged Thorn up by his throat, lifting his feet off the ground. You called her broken. Lucian roared, shaking the traitor. She gave her sight so that I could see your treachery. She walked into the dark so I could bring the light. She is worth 1,000 of you. With a savage roar, Lucian threw Thorn across the room. The traitor hit the wall and slid down, unconscious and broken. Lucian stood in the center of the hall, chest heaving, his hands stained with the blood of the men who had tried to hurt her. He looked wild, terrifying, a god of war. He turned slowly back to Isla. The rage evaporated from his face, replaced by a desperate need to reassure her. He walked back to her, ignoring the cowering pack. He took her face in his blood-stained hands, careless of the silk dress. Did they hurt you? He demanded, scanning her for injuries he knew weren't there. No, Isla wept, shaking. You caught it. You caught the knife. Lucian turned to the room. He didn't need to shout anymore. The silence was his throne. Bow, he commanded. One by one, knees hit the stone floor. The elders, the warriors, the mothers, they bowed not just to the alpha who had returned from the dead, but to the small, blind woman in the blue silk dress who stood beside him. This is your queen, Lucian declared, his voice ringing off the rafters. Her eyes are my eyes, her will is my will. Anyone who disrespects her, disrespects me. Anyone who harms her, dies. He pulled Isla against his chest, shielding her from the world he had just conquered for her. It is over, he whispered into her hair. The threat is gone. You are safe. Ayla leaned into him, listening to the thundering of his heart, the heart she had saved. And for the first time since the ritual, in the safety of his arms, the darkness didn't feel quite so empty. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than the noise of the crowd. The great hall had been cleared. The blood had been scrubbed from the stones. The pack had retreated to their dens, whispering of the miracle, the return of the king, and the blind witch who now held the highest rank in the kingdom. But high above the castle, on the private balcony of the master suite, Ayla stood alone. The night air was crisp, biting at her exposed arms, but she didn't move to go inside. She gripped the cold stone railing, her unseeing eyes turned toward where she felt the moon should be. She could hear the wind whistling through the peaks of the obsidian mountains. She could smell the pine forest stretching out for miles, a vast, beautiful kingdom she would never see. A heavy velvet cloak settled over her shoulders, warm and smelling of him. "You are shivering," Lucian's voice came from behind her, low and soft. Isla didn't turn. She pulled the cloak tighter. "I didn't hear you approach. I didn't want to startle you," he said. He moved to stand beside her, his presence a solid wall of heat against the chill. "The pack is settled. Thorn is in the dungeons. He will never trouble us again." "Good," Isla whispered. Lucian turned to her, his brow furrowing. He reached out, his hand covering hers on the railing. "You sound sad. We won, Ayla. You are safe. You are home." Isla let out a shaky breath. The adrenaline of the confrontation was gone, and the dark reality was settling back in. "I am safe," she agreed, "and I am grateful. But, today, in the hall, when Thorn threw that knife, he paid for it," Lucian growled. "I didn't know it was coming," Ayla interrupted, her voice cracking. "If you hadn't been there, I would have just stood there and let it hit me. I am helpless, Lucian. I am a queen who cannot see her own subjects. I cannot see the threats. I will always be a burden to you." She turned her face away, shame burning her cheeks. "You are a king of war. You need a mate who can run with you, who can fight beside you. Not this." Lucian went very still. "Is that what you think?" he asked quietly. "That you are a burden?" "I am in the dark," she whispered. "Forever." Lucian moved then. He turned her body to face him, his hands gripping her waist. "Do you remember the spell?" he asked intensely. "The specific words you used?" Isla frowned, confused. "Ex tenebris, ad lucem." From darkness to light. "Exactly," Lucian said. "You thought you were just moving the physical blindness from me to you. You thought it was a trade." He took one of her hands and pressed it against his temple. "But we are mates, Isla, and that spell. It didn't just connect our eyes. It fused our minds." "I don't understand," she breathed. "I didn't understand it either, until the fight in the hall," Lucian admitted. "When my adrenaline spiked, I felt a pull. A channel opening up between us. I realized I wasn't just protecting you. I was broadcasting to you." He leaned his forehead against hers. "Stop trying to see with your eyes, little seer," he commanded gently. "They are gone. Let them go. Use the bond. Reach out to me." Isla hesitated. She was terrified of hoping, but the command in his voice was irresistible. She closed her gray, clouded eyes. She focused on the warmth of his skin, the beat of his heart, and the golden thread of energy that hummed between them. She pushed her consciousness toward him. "Let me in." The sensation was instantaneous and overwhelming. It was like a dam breaking. Color. It rushed into her mind with the force of a tidal wave. Not through her own eyes, but projected directly into her brain. She gasped, clutching Lucian's shirt. She saw the night sky. It was a deep, bruised purple, scattered with stars that looked like crushed diamonds. She saw the moon huge, full, and silver, hanging over jagged black peaks. I can see," she sobbed, the image wavering as her focus slipped. "Steady," Lucian's voice echoed in her mind, clear and bell-like. "Look closer." The perspective shifted. She realized she wasn't looking at Lucian. She was looking at herself. She was seeing Ayla through Lucian's eyes. She saw a woman standing on a balcony, bathed in moonlight. She was small, yes, but she wasn't frail. She looked ethereal. The midnight blue silk of her dress rippled in the wind like water. Her hair was a dark halo around a face that was pale and lovely, and her eyes. She saw her own eyes. They were gray and unseeing, yes, but in Lucian's vision, they weren't broken. They were mysterious. They were the center of his world. The image zoomed in on her face. She felt the love radiating from the view. She saw herself not as a cripple, but as a goddess. She saw the way the light caught the curve of her neck. She saw the reverence in the gaze. "Is this?" Isla's voice trembled in the physical world. "Is this how you see me?" "Every moment," Lucian whispered, his lips brushing hers. "You think you are broken. I see only the woman who saved my soul. I see the most beautiful creature to ever walk the earth." Isla watched through his eyes as he leaned in. She saw his face coming closer. He was devastatingly handsome, with the scar cutting through his stubble and eyes of burning gold. She saw his eyes flutter shut as he closed the distance. Then, the visual went black as he kissed her, replaced by the explosion of tactile sensation. His lips were warm, demanding, and possessive. He kissed her with the hunger of a man who had stared death in the face and won. Isla melted into him, wrapping her arms around his neck, no longer afraid of the dark. Because the dark wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with him. He pulled back, and the vision returned. She saw herself smiling a true, radiant smile. "As long as I live," Lucian vowed, his forehead resting against hers, "you will never be in the dark again. Where I go, you go. What I see, you see. We are one entity now, Isla. One soul in two bodies." Isla opened her eyes. They were still blind, but her mind was filled with the image of the king who loved her. "The seer and the king," she whispered. "The queen and her vision," he corrected. He swept her up into his arms, just as he had in the snow, but this time, there was no desperation, only triumph. "Come," he said, carrying her toward the warmth of the room inside. "Let me show you our kingdom. Let me show you our future." As they crossed the threshold, Ayla didn't look back at the cold, empty wasteland she had come from. She looked forward, through the golden eyes of her mate, and saw a life filled with light,